Boston enters a new era with a regime change at City Hall.
It's good to have new blood in there.
The grand old party suffers a series of setbacks.
Like I said, I don't like to get up and give speeches.
And the political press creates stories where there are none.
I am not running for president.
We'll look back at the year that was in politics, now on a special edition of Greater Boston. Good evening. If you want to get technical, 2013 was an off-year election. There was no presidential contest, no major turnover in Congress, and just 2 states held gubernatorial races. But Massachusetts is a special case. We seem to be in a perpetual state of special election, and that, coupled with this year's contentious Boston mayoral race, made for some juicy political headlines. Tonight, we're looking back at some of them. Joining me to share their insights, Republican State Senator Bob Hedlund, Farah Stockman of the Boston Globe, Telemundo Boston special correspondent Marcela Garcia, and WGBH News political reporter Adam Riley. Welcome to all of you. All right, well, we begin tonight with the seismic political shift underway in Boston. Tom Menino has been mayor for 2 decades, and in that time, the city has transformed, along with the idea of what it means to be a Bostonian. Now the Menino era is drawing to a close, but the city's evolution shows no signs of stopping. Adam has more.
Tom Menino's tenure as mayor has been packed with big events. The Central Artery came down. A brand new neighborhood went up in South Boston. Whitey Bulger was captured, and the championship-starved Red Sox finally broke through.
The Boston Red Sox are World Series champions.
Through it all, Menino was a constant, in good times and in bad.
And since the clock struck that fateful hour, love has covered this resilient city. I have never loved it and its people more than I do today.
But this spring, after a spate of serious health problems, the mayor did what many people thought he would never do, saying he'd voluntarily leave the job that defined him.
I'm here with the people I love, to tell the city I love that I will leave the job that I love.
Maybe the prospect of a young, energetic challenger played a role.
This campaign is about Boston's future.
But soon, John Connolly had plenty of company. The mayoral field swelled to 12, with several hoping to become Boston's first mayor of color.
People of color will absolutely be a factor in the electorate on Tuesday.
Instead, it was Connolly and another guy with an Irish last name who made the final.
We did it!
Still, the way Marty Walsh and John Connolly ran showed just how far Boston's come since the busing battles of the 70s.
We have 5.5 days left to make sure that we complete something that Mel King started 30 years ago.
And after Walsh's mayoral triumph, he vowed to make the city an even more inclusive place.
Boston will be a city for all its people in every neighborhood, not just some.
Apparently, Boston politics isn't what it used to be, and that is good news.
Well, there's no question it has changed in the last 20 years since Mayor Menino took over. City is now majority minority, but is it really significant? Is it really a sea change? We saw the 2 finalists ended up being 2 guys with Irish last names, 2 white guys. There were a field of many qualified minorities in the race, but it ended up being the same old. Why?
I think it really didn't matter. I mean, Walsh ran an impressive campaign. He was an incredible campaigner and almost flawless, but I think he was helped by the endorsement of the 3 minority candidates that finished the highest in the preliminary election, John Barros, Felix Arroyo, and Charlo Golarich. I think that really helped him get elected as the next mayor of Boston. Whether he's going to become a 1-term or 2nd-term mayor, it just depends on how well he delivers on the promises that he made. For minorities, for example, he's going to have a diverse cabinet, and I think the minorities and the communities of color is going to, they're going to hold him accountable for that. And whether he appoints any of those people or whoever, it's going to matter.
I was struck by a couple things involving Walsh's election and the way he cultivated minority voters. The fact that the three top finishers who were candidates of color got behind him as enthusiastically as they did, to me, raises a question about whether they're going to be able to apply pressure if they're not in the administration if he fails to meet the expectations that he's established. And I got to say, given how fulsome the endorsements of Felix Arroyo and Charlotte Golder-Ritchie and John Barros were, I don't know that they're going to be able to play the part of critic if he doesn't deliver. The other thing that I was struck by during the campaign is that both Marty Walsh and John Connolly, when they talked about sort of disparities in the city and things that were not happening in Roxbury or Mattapan that were happening elsewhere in the city, they sounded to me a lot like Charlotte Golder-Ritchie or John Barros or Felix Arroyo. There was this sense of, this theme of two Bostons that came up again and again and again. And I do think that they came at it ideologically or intellectually from the same place that those candidates had just mentioned, which I think is a sign of progress of a sort.
I think one thing we're missing is that the city certainly has changed, as it's pointed out in the piece, but that change is reflected in the makeup of the city council now. We have, I think, as much of a diverse city council makeup as we've ever had in the city. And just the fact that the two finalists happen to be two white Irish guys, I think, doesn't diminish that fact. And Adam's right about the investment now made by those candidates. It led me to wonder, and something I didn't see reported on during the mayoral race was, what did John Connolly do maybe to alienate his city council colleagues? Yeah. Because there's a natural gravitation to endorse the person you know. You see that in legislative races, for instance, based on geography. What happened in that race is beyond me, that he couldn't pick up any of those people. Maybe. I don't know. But that's something that I never saw examined in the media.
Well, we're seeing an interesting coalition between working class whites and the minority communities that we hadn't. I don't know that we've sort of seen that before. I mean, the 70s, there was antagonism between those communities, and now sort of Marty Walsh represents what could be a new era. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Not just working class whites, minority communities, but then also the sort of lefty activists who helped get Elizabeth Warren elected. And it's really interesting and sort of not necessarily an intuitive mix. Someone, I think it was Paul McMorrow, writing a piece for Time.com, pointed out that the only thing these groups really have in common is Marty Walsh. And kudos to him for managing to stitch this coalition together, but you do wonder if it'll hold.
I have to say, just in the past few weeks, Marty Walsh's campaign has continued. Incredibly impressive. Tonight he had to cancel. Last night he had a transportation meeting. I think tonight it was environment, and he had to cancel it because of the snow. But, I mean, the reach out every single day. And he's technically so savvy, too. That's the kind of thing you didn't see so much from the Menino operation. And I'm just wondering if anybody can kind of speculate about this, because you looked at how long Tom Menino was there. There's no question he did great things. The waterfront, certain areas of Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, got facelifts as well. I mean, neighborhoods came alive.
Way out front on gay and lesbian issues from early on.
But some of it, just by virtue of time, for being there, for holding the seat, progress. I mean, you think about all the presidential administrations we've been through just since he took office. I mean, some of it is by virtue of length. I mean, what would you give him most credit for, and what would you say Marty Walsh really needs to take off on?
Well, I give Menino most credit, as evidenced by the intro package, for delivering 3 Red Sox World Champions. I mean, no, I don't know. Longevity brings you certain accolades in the end. I just think for having a steady hand more than anything. I think he was kind of a balance between, the precedent set by Mayor White by being the downtown mayor and Ray Flynn being the neighborhood guy. It almost seemed like Tom Menino was able to bridge both of those things. Now's not the time to point criticism out, but some of the issues like the BRA that Marty Walsh has talked about maybe reforming, I hope he holds to that pledge and improves upon the situation that's left behind by Tom Menino. But I think kind of being the mayor to everybody in all aspects and all operations of the city, I think is really what his legacy, I think, in my mind is.
Just to echo what Bob said, I mean, you look at I don't remember the exact number, but the number of residents of Boston who the mayor has met.
Right.
60%.
What is it, 60, 65? Yeah. I mean, some crazy figure. Right. So his ability, and a big city to be this sort of accessible figure that people feel they have a personal connection to. I mean, I'm just in a way paraphrasing what you just said.
It's probably like Ted Williams' last game, though. Everybody was there, right? Every resident of Boston. Oh, yeah, I met him at the coffee shop. Right. You wonder about those statistics. I'm sure Ray Flynn met as many of the residents because he was someone that was out in the neighborhoods all the time. But I get a kick out of that statistic, and I wonder if it's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, one of the things I keep looking at with Marty Walsh, I know I'm kind of like riding this thing, but he's got to go after the tax base, because right now over 50% of the city of Boston is tax-free, including this institution. I mean, payment in lieu of taxes has got to become, I mean, look at what just happened with Partners. You know, they're moving their operation, their big headquarters to Somerville. After Mayor Menino's tearing his hair out, he gave them millions and millions. I mean, I don't even want to know how many millions of dollars worth of tax breaks. And he became buddies with those guys. He thought that they were, going to establish their operation in Roxbury. Marty Walsh is going to get on that and reverse that thing. And by the way, get after other institutions to pony up.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how all of that, he had a lot of inspiring rhetoric about the working class and about the poor, and how that translates into keeping businesses here, because at the end of the day, you do have to be a mayor to the people downtown as well, and then that was not his constituency. And the other thing, speaking of sort of structural challenges, he's got his work cut out for him when he talks about promising to get more diversity on the police department and the fire department. I mean, there are real structural reasons why that hasn't happened yet and may not happen. And so I wonder how easy it's going to be to deliver on some of those promises.
All right. Well, it's been years since New England Republicans were in a position to shape the future of the national GOP. But as 2013 draws to a close, the party is looking especially feeble here in the Northeast. And if the governor's race doesn't turn the tide in Massachusetts, the party's future viability may be in doubt. Here's Adam with more.
After John Kerry left the U.S. Senate, the race for his old seat came down to two men. Democratic Congressman Ed Markey wasn't the smoothest candidate.
Well, again, Mr. Gomez, you said that...
But he absolutely trounced Republican Gabriel Gomez, who never seemed ready for prime time.
I don't like to get up and give speeches. I'd rather go run. Like, I ran 20 miles this afternoon.
It was yet another letdown for the Massachusetts GOP. In recent years, state Republicans have lost the governorship, seen Scott Brown bounce from the U.S. Senate, and watched their state Senate total drop to just 4 of 40 seats. And the trend goes beyond Massachusetts.
I say that we have to put the emphasis on bipartisanship.
Maine Senator Olympia Snow's retirement was one more setback for old-fashioned New England Republicanism. For decades, that blend of fiscal conservatism and social moderation got results.
I believe that abortion should be safe and legal in this country.
Not anymore. Just 2 of the region's 30-plus congressional seats are currently held by the GOP. And in Massachusetts, the latest special election brought a familiar result.
We did it!
Maybe Charlie Baker can turn the tide. After losing in the last governor's race, the Swampscott Republican is running again as a unifier.
Let's rise above the politics. Here's an idea: bipartisan leadership.
But lately, that isn't what the voters seem to want.
Bob, I'm turning to you. What's going on? Remember when Mitt Romney, in his one and only term as governor, had this idea that he was going to turn the tide of the legislature, the Senate and the legislature. He was going to get it, and he had all the positions out all over the state. And I think he ended up losing a couple of seats that year as opposed to gaining them.
I recall going to a press conference where that team of candidates was unveiled, and it was an incredible crop of candidates: doctors, stockbrokers, teachers. It was phenomenal. The result wasn't so good, and I believe it was a presidential year, and we were swimming against the tide like sometimes we do in Massachusetts. I know early in my career we lost 7 seats in one fell swoop in the Senate, in the Bill Clinton tide that came through here and washed out George Bush. But I don't know what I can add to that piece other than to say that maybe somewhere down south there is a talk show host interviewing a Democrat legislator saying, what's the problem here? But I don't think it's as bad going into the next cycle as people make it out to be. We've got a great candidate in Charlie Baker. There's no unified opposition on the other side, obviously. And I would say, with all due respect to some of the candidates, they're not the finest crop of candidates the Democrats have put forward for the position of governor in past years. And we have some great candidates for the legislature legislature. Again, the problem I've seen in recent years is we had great candidates running in bad districts, and we had very weak candidates running in good districts. I think the pieces are better aligned this time around. I think we will increase our ranks in the legislature. In terms of the congressional races around New England, I don't know what the story is going to be with that, and I just hope that voters are able to make a distinction between a federal race and a local race, because there is a big difference between the type of candidates we put up here in Massachusetts to run for office versus what the national dialogue is in some of these congressional races.
But that's a problem. I mean, the Republicans should have been able to put up somebody against Catherine Clark up in the 5th District. That was the most lackluster.
Did, actually.
Well, I know, I met him. He's a nice guy, but he wasn't going to win it.
And he didn't, my recollection is that he didn't really get sort of meaningful support from the national GOP. Although, of course, if he had, that's the sort of easy out for Democrats, is if he were supported by the national GOP, then there would have been a push to tie him to...
I can even say his name, Adamanola.
Frank Adamanola. A good guy, too.
I hope that Bob's predictions of, Republican gains come to pass, because I think that a lot of the worst excesses that we see in state government are enabled by the fact that we're, almost a one-party state, something very close to it. And when there's that kind of impunity, I think it's not good for the public. I would also say that I do think Charlie Baker is a really strong candidate. Last time around, I think there was an assumption in the Baker camp, I don't know if it came from him himself, but in the Baker campaign, they thought that the governor's, the number of people who thought the state was on the wrong track versus the right track, they thought those numbers basically meant that Baker couldn't lose. And what they failed to take into account was that, Governor Patrick is, I think, one of the most skilled retail politicians any of us is going to have a chance to see up close and personal. No one like that in this field, like you said. And Baker, I think, actually got short shrift as a candidate last time around, so he's going to be tough.
I don't know. I haven't seen any poll numbers that show him anywhere close to even Martha Coakley. There was something like 36% of people didn't know who he was. So I think he's got a tough row to hoe. I think Massachusetts, is surrounded by. We're pushing Elizabeth Warren. She's the superstar here, and she is pushing a really different narrative. And we're exporting our Republicans. Look at Scott Brown. He sold his house. He's going to New Hampshire, and that's where he has a chance. I think in a place like New Hampshire or Maine, there are a lot. I mean, if you're sick of Taxachusetts, you're going to go to New Hampshire, and there are a bunch of exiles from Massachusetts who live in New Hampshire, and I think that's where some Republican candidates might flourish. I just think if you talk to Elizabeth Warren, she will tell you, we're fighting for our life in the Senate, we're fighting for our life in the House, and we just don't want to give the GOP any extra seats there. And so people in Massachusetts that even might be independent or want to lean moderate, they're really faced with this question of are you really going to give a vote in Congress?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Do you think partly this is a national problem, Marcella?
I think so, absolutely.
The fear that they're going to support people like Mitch McConnell, that was one of the problems that Scott Brown faced.
Exactly. And going back to or thinking about the piece, I wouldn't disqualify Gabriel Gomez of maybe running a race that he might win down the road. I think, obviously, he lost, but I think he won in many ways because he won and he just ran an implausible run, and he ended up being the Republican candidate, not because he was more conservative than Winslow, but because Republicans thought he had the best chance, in beating Markey, and that's a lot to say. Now, granted, he may be running for treasurer or something else, but there's a history of Republicans running in different races before. Look at Mitt Romney, or remember Mitt Romney when he ran that against Kennedy. Edward Kennedy, and then he became governor of Massachusetts. So I think there's something to be said about Gabriel Gomez, and I don't think we've seen the last of him because I think he may have the chance to becoming, a new face of the Republican Party here.
As the person who picked out what was probably the least flattering soundbite from Gabriel Gomez that we had available, I want to just push back on that a little bit. I mean, Mitt Romney, whatever his faults, came to that Senate race as sort of, he was a name in business, and he was a name politically, too. He'd had his, actually the Olympics came after the Senate run, I guess, but he was, his father had run for president. He was more of an established name, I think, than Gabriel Gomez, and I saw Gomez a fair amount in his campaign. Very likable guy, but most of what he did in his public appearances was remind people that he'd been a Navy SEAL. That's impressive, but I remember...
He had such a cool jacket.
Super cool jacket, but I remember, I think,
but that was
tweeting the morning
the
after he lost that what he should do is take off the Navy SEAL jacket and go on a statewide listening tour where he talked to people about the issues that were important to him if he wants to have a future in politics. As far as I know, he didn't heed my free advice, but, you know...
But he's been doing that. He's been doing, I mean, obviously not in that open way and official, but I've seen him without jacket.
Good.
But I've seen him, like, out there, and he's much more relaxed. He is absolutely not the same person that ran that race, and I would be the one. I was the first one to obviously, you know, not even give him a pass, 'cause when he spoke Spanish during that video, when he announced the candidacy, he was awful Spanish, and believe me, he also committed a lot of gaffes in Spanish, not only in English. He said a lot of weird things in Spanish too. But I really think there's something there. He may have to try himself again in a couple of other races until he gets one. But I think. And being Hispanic too, you know, the party has a huge problem with the demographic, and they should be looking at him. You know,
who's up and coming in the party?
Besides me,
I mean, this guy McCormick might have been a Republican, but he's running as an independent.
Well, he's got a track record of having contributed to Democrats too, so we don't really know where he's coming from. I think that's a work in progress. We'll learn more. But no, we do have a weak bench, and that's been evidenced by the fact that we haven't been able to attract constitutional office candidates right now at this point. You know, there was a story in one of the papers about Jen Casey, who is a governor's council, attractive candidate, Central Mass, good area geographically, no interest in running. So they've been reaching out to people like that, and so far there have been no takers, obviously, other than Karen Polito, who is running for lieutenant governor. So we do have a weak bench. We have some really talented people in the legislature who, you know, maybe haven't had enough time in. We've got a lot of new House members that have brought a lot of energy to that caucus. As you remember, it was only a couple of election cycles ago we doubled our ranks in the House. And I do think that you'll see more of a farm team develop. Is it going to be there in place for this next election cycle? I'm not sure.
All right. Well, finally tonight, the press prides itself on keeping politicians on their toes. But this year, some members of the Fourth Estate got a little ahead of themselves, rushing to press with some political headlines before they were fully formed. Once again, Adam has details.
Elizabeth Warren has said it repeatedly. She's not interested in the White House.
Is there absolutely no circumstance when you, Senator Warren, would run to be president of the United States?
I am not running for president of the United States.
But that hasn't stopped the media, which took a speculative New Republic piece on Warren's future and turned it into a major story.
Senator Barack Obama once said he wasn't running for president.
And it's not just Warren. Right now, the political media has a penchant for turning non-stories into big events. From the Boston Herald labeling Tag Romney a great GOP hope, to the Boston Globe saying Charlie Baker faces a conservative backlash after picking Karen Polito as his running mate. Right now, both claims seem way premature. Memo to political journalists. Heading into 2014, let's all take a deep breath and take it down a notch.
Falls into that category of nothing too small to pick up and make a big deal out of. I mean, even the Herald the other day writing about, you know, Governor Patrick traveling in Asia while there was crises back home. I go, what crises? I couldn't even figure out what they were talking about. But it's my least favorite thing is that the day a presidential race is over, the media is on to who's running next.
Yeah, there's no break. And I got to confess here that I actually was guilty on the Elizabeth Warren front. I haven't been, I don't think she's running for president, and I didn't think that, but I remember being at the presser where Noah Bierman from the Globe kept, you know, pushing her. Are you running for president? Are you running for president? Will you pledge not to run for president? And she finally said, okay, I pledge not to run for president. And I pointed out in a blog post on WGBHnews.org that her pledge was made under duress. And so I had contributed.
You had.
It's, you know, when the alternative is writing about sort of the hopeless gridlock in Washington, D.C., and, you know, this stuff is fun to cover, but it's still absurd.
You know, I think it actually signals that the electorate is actually more engaged. And I think the media, and this is maybe just my holiday optimism working here, but you know, in talking about the mayoral election, I actually did see an appetite, an increasing appetite for these type of stories, even after the election, when everyone was talking about election fatigue and, oh, let's not talk about the election anymore. I still saw people that wanted to, hear the deconstructing, the overanalyzing, and to me that was refreshing. Maybe it's because more people are getting engaged, even though the numbers of the voters' numbers didn't reflect that. I really think that there's a new appetite for that, and maybe that's engagement there.
I want to hear those stories too, but I don't want to hear these bizarro stories.
Right.
Open up my paper about Mitt Romney's son or Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And even on some local matters, I think there's some hypersensitivity on the part of the press. I saw it with you guys recently talking about Michelle Wu and who she might be supporting for city council president, and overanalyzing what that might be about, and I think that was a little bit unfair.
But I think there's some truth to that. There is some truth to that, because people in the ground were really incensed about Michelle Wu, and I was hearing it out, and I was even, and this is what I'm talking.
Some people on the ground. Some
that's not a manufactured
controversy.
That is not a manufactured controversy.
I think it's real. Who becomes city council president is real.
Everybody becomes city council president. Everybody gets a turn.
But let me ask this question. If it were a conservative member of the council supporting a liberal, which has happened in the past, would there be this dissemination of what is their reasoning for supporting
there might have been, I would just say, I think there would have been, if there had been the palpable outcry on social media and in other areas from supporters of that groundbreaking conservative candidate who were saying,
where the story came from.
I would defend myself with Marcel and Ferry here.
I saw
there was a real story there.
I think that was a real story. I mean, I do think whoever is city council president, that's how Mayor Menino became president.
The result of that was it painted Bill Linehan unfairly, I think, as a result of that chatter by very liberal people on social media.
But I think that the manufactured outrage of the other two stories, the tag, Romney, and I don't know. I feel like that's a function of horse race coverage. Well, how we cover politics is like, who's up today? Who's down? Who's in? Who's out? And it's like, instead of actually covering what people are really doing and the real complicated issues that they're grappling with, we just do these polls. And I think that when you don't have a hot race going on, then you're like, well, who would be? Yeah, and that's just a failure of imagination.
I feel that way with the Hillary coverage too.
Hillary versus Christie already.
It's a failure of imagination to find it more interesting news when there is no.
How about Hillary? How about Scott Brown versus Elizabeth Warren in 2016?
For president?
Yeah.
I thought she said she wasn't.
In a way, it's sort of the Politico approach to political journalism, right? Who's winning the day? It's not about substantive issues or policy issues. It's who scored today.
Made worse by social media as well.
Yeah. Right.
And God knows there's a lot of issues that need examination right now in this country, and it's not happening.
It's just not as much fun. That's the truth.
Well, it's not as easy. It's not an easy answer.
Right. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it. That is our look back at the year in politics. Join us tomorrow night as we reflect on the ups and downs of 2013. From the marathon bombings to the triumphant Red Sox season, it's been an emotionally charged 12 months. We'll revisit that awful day in April and the events that followed and changed our city. And Thursday, we carry on a greater Boston tradition. Jared Bowen and his fellow film critics dish on the hits and misses now in theaters. Plus, local authors share their list of the year's must-reads. It's our annual holiday books and movies special. That's Thursday at 7. I'm Emily Rooney. Thanks for watching.